In one of the most remote and unforgiving wildernesses in the world, two strangers sit huddled in a makeshift tent they've built. The man and the young woman are freezing and on the verge of death. A snowstorm batters their makeshift tent. The wind blasts seem to the pair like nature itself has a vendetta against them. They're miles away from any town, and what they don't know is that as they sit and wait, the media is saying there is little hope the missing pair will be found alive. The storm abates, and suddenly the woman sees a plane in the sky, but her hope is crushed as it fades into the distance. "In the name of God," she says, "please come back." She's well aware she doesn't have long to live. The story starts at the beginning of the 1960s, a decade that would become renowned for its decadence and colorful youth culture. Just prior to that decade, there was the Beat movement, a counterculture that enshrined something that would become known as the road trip, with Jack Kerouac's book On the Road inspiring many young Americans to take off and explore their own country from end to end. And that's just what a young Jewish girl from New York named Helen Klaben wanted to do, to follow in the footsteps of people who turned away from convention and instead went looking for adventure. When Klaben was just 20 years old, she saw an ad in a newspaper asking if anyone wanted to share the gas costs and take a car all the way to Fairbanks, Alaska. She replied, and the two set off on a long journey. After a few months in Alaska, she knew where she wanted to explore next, and that was the mystical East. She wasn't sure where she'd go exactly, maybe India, maybe Hong Kong, but before that she had to get to a destination to take a flight across the world. That destination was San Francisco, a city on the verge of a cultural revolution. Early in 1963, Klaben met a 41-year-old Mexican-American amateur pilot by the name of Ralph Flores. He was an aircraft mechanic that hailed from California, and he too wanted to get back home and leave Alaska. The pair agreed to share the expenses of the journey, and off they went to their first destination, which was the capital of the Yukon Territory, Whitehorse, the most populated place in that wild part of the world. They had another stop after that, and that was at Fort St. John in British Columbia. It was winter and bitterly cold. Snowstorms raged and the plane was grounded for 3 days. A small single-engine airplane couldn't hope to fly over such an unforgiving territory in such bad conditions. Nonetheless, with the weather warning still present, the two took off again into the sky. Their next landing would be anything but smooth. The pair flew for hours in strong winds, the plane being tossed around like a dandelion seed in a strong breeze. Flores could hardly see anything with the snow blasting against the plane. He and Klaben knew they somehow had to get out of that storm, so Flores attempted to get above the clouds and out of danger. His plan was to come back down and find the Alaska Highway, which would lead him to the airport. That was the thing. He needed the road to get his bearings because, being an amateur, he didn't quite understand the instruments in the aircraft. On top of that, he hadn't even packed emergency supplies on board in case of a crash. There were no real tools, not much in terms of food supplies, nothing to keep someone warm, and not even a gun in case they came up against a rather hungry animal. The Yukon is full of bears, small ones, large ones, and utterly fearsome ones. They at least had a knife. It was a time of desperation, and Klaben started to lose her cool. She knew that the pilot was totally lost, but he refused to admit that. Then she suddenly saw a mountainside and some trees, and she knew they were going to crash. She said to herself, "Okay, Helen, here it comes." And it came, with a bang. She closed her eyes and just hoped for the best, and when she opened them, she was alive. The plane had landed at the side of a mountain close to the Yukon-British Columbia border. She had a broken arm, and she had some broken ribs and a fractured jaw. There was nothing but mountains and trees around, and snow covered everything. Just walking around was an effort because the temperature at times would go down to negative 45 degrees Celsius. They huddled in the wreckage of the plane to escape the blistering cold. Frostbite was a certainty in these conditions if they stayed out too long in the open. As days went by, search parties flew over the skies and looked for the pair, but it was incredibly difficult to see anything in between the trees when everything is covered with snow. They literally had nothing to eat after they finished off some cans of sardines, tuna, fruit, and some crackers. There were no supplies at all after that, and they were only 10 days in. The one important thing they could do to survive was to melt snow for water. They had a box of matches and so could make a fire. With both of them in pain from their injuries and without the equipment to hunt, they just sat and waited and starved. Day by day, the pounds came off as their bodies burned their own fat reserves. Flores did try and make something that looked like a slingshot, but it was useless, and he soon gave up on hunting rabbits. They did have another thing though, and in a way you might call that an emergency supply for the religious mind. It was a Bible, something Flores took everywhere with him since he'd converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was a devout Mormon. He told Klavan that this crash they'd experienced had some significance in regard to the bigger picture of things. He told her to read the Bible and they would be saved. She had to convert. Each day, they heard planes rumbling overhead, and each day Klavan continued reading the Bible, hoping her devout accomplice was right about his God. He actually told her that if she read the whole thing and then accepted the divinity of Jesus Christ, they would be saved. She wasn't exactly comforted by this and didn't believe him, but hey, there wasn't that much reading material in the middle of nowhere. Weeks now passed and they made a discovery. They found toothpaste, and that suddenly started looking tasty. Each day they squeezed the tube and gratefully swallowed the minty cream. They knew it wasn't really sustenance, but it was at least something to put in their mouths. They also had chewing gum, and they chewed that for weeks on end. Things got desperate after a few weeks, and while they could at least keep themselves a little bit warm with insulation they made out of clothes and cushions, Klavan got serious frostbite and then gangrene in her foot. She could now hardly move at all. She was all but ready to give up the ghost and had lost about a third of her body weight. Flores just told her to keep reading that Bible and never give up hope of a rescue. Still, as time went by, even he seemed to have given up on one of those planes in the sky seeing them. Flores then told Klavan that since he could walk, he would go and try to find civilization. He walked off in the woods, leaving her behind to her own thoughts. She decided to write about what happened, but soon gave up on that when it started to sound like an epitaph. She wasn't ready to sign off just yet. 8 days later, and Flores came back. He told his dying companion that he had at least found what looked like a clearing, and so humans might have been there. There was also much more chance of someone seeing them from the sky once they were away from all the trees. They had to walk there and make a shack of some sort. It took hours to get there. Klavan's foot was badly infected now, and the pain of walking was unbearable. As they got closer to the clearing, they heard a noise, like a humming, in the distance. Flores went in search of that noise and then returned sometime later. He told Klavan he'd found a frozen pond and that he'd written SOS in it, and also etched the shape of an arrow that pointed to where they were. He'd done this with the snowshoes he'd made out of tree bark. He told Klavan he'd go out again with a mirror and try to catch sight of the pilot. She didn't want to be alone again, but he assured her that it was the only option now. Was there hope? It was day 47 of their ordeal, a day after Klavan had finished reading the Bible. And now we introduce you to a man of the wild, one Charles Chuck Hamilton. In March that year, as those two were freezing and starving to death, he was out in his plane trying to spot animals to hunt. He had a good eye for that kind of thing. He spotted no moose that day, but he did see SOS written into what looked like a frozen pond. He didn't immediately think about the missing plane. That had been weeks ago, and it wasn't something that was still on his mind. In fact, he and his passenger thought that the remark must have been left by a trapper, seeing as trappers did sometimes find themselves in difficulty in the wild. At the same time, Klavan had seen the plane in the sky. She made a fire and frantically threw green pine on it. Black smoke gushed into the sky. Surely, someone would see that. She was now in tears, full of desperate joy, ignoring the pain in her foot. Flores was out in the woods trying to use the mirror to flash sunlight back at the plane. Hamilton actually had to turn away from the black smoke since it was so thick and heavy, but it was then he saw a man standing with a mirror in his hands. Hamilton found a place to set down the plane near a cabin on an airport lake. He was about 6 miles away from the pair. Trappers were working at this cabin, and that's the noise the pair had heard. The trappers had been cutting firewood with the chainsaw. All these men got together with their dogs and set off to find the man with the mirror. Because of the smoke, Klavan hadn't yet been seen. Hamilton then left the trappers and said he'd investigate from the sky again. But now that fire had died down. When he looked at where the fire had been, he could just make out a tent. He then made a radio call and said, "I think I found the lost people." Night was now falling, and so Hamilton returned home, hoping the trappers had found those people. The media called him all night long, but he couldn't sleep anyway, thinking about the poor souls alone out there. At this point, no one knew if there was just one survivor or two, since only the man with the mirror had been seen. Hamilton only guessed the woman was the source of the fire. The trappers actually did find Flores that night, but Klavan waited the whole night alone at the shelter. It was now pitch black, and the rescue would have to wait until morning. Hamilton actually turned to his wife and said, "What if she's dead when I get there?" He flew off before dawn and landed a couple miles from where that tent was. From there, he walked in, and about 1 hour later, Klavan saw a hulk of a man striding toward her. A man she said was pixie-faced. When he met her, she embraced him and cried and kissed his grizzled cheek. The brave woman said she could walk out even with a terribly infected frostbitten foot. Hamilton responded to that saying, "If I can carry a moose out of the woods, I can carry you." It took some time though, walking on snowshoes with a woman on his back, a frail woman at least, who now only weighed 100 pounds. When Klavan was finally taken to a hospital, the doctor said she wouldn't have lasted one more night. Had they stayed another night, that SOS in the lake would have been covered. They were discovered in the nick of time. When Klavan was well enough, she met with a host of reporters, to whom she acclaimed, "Hey, I'm alive!" She was all good except a few missing toes. Klavan soon went back to Brooklyn and Flores went home to his family in California. She never did convert and become a Mormon, but she later said the ordeal did make her more spiritual. The experience, she said, helped her to find herself. In an interview, she said most people expect they'd not be able to cope with the crisis, and it was a great experience to find out that I could. Klavan wrote a book about what had happened and never lost her sense of adventure, traveling through many regions of Asia and Europe and the Americas. She died in 2018, aged 76. Flores was also 76 when he passed away in 1997. So we guess these two had one last experience they could share. The now old Chuck Hamilton left the wilds and moved to Victoria, where he lives today with his family. He keeps a token of the event in his basement, a bit of the wreckage with the serial number N5886. We have more great tales of survival and many other topics too, so go watch another right now. Either this video over here or check out this one over here.